Hello, my friends. Welcome to Living the Liminal this week. I'm so glad you're here. You are in for a treat. This is going to be one of the most fun conversations I've had. Not that I haven't had them before, because I always have fun and am enjoying getting to know people and talking about stories and delving into, wisdom and insight and all that good, juicy stuff. But this one is just hilarious to me because I'm going to tell you a little background about our guest. So I'm in New York City, and if you go back to last season, episode 72, I start to talk about this moment when I'm in New York City. I go there. I love New York City, and I'm like journeying through learning how to really trust myself in lots of moments. And before the subway incident of what I talk about in episode 72, I was with a friend for a couple days, and we went to this event, and I met our guest. Not because we knew people who were introducing us, because I overheard her say, I wrote a book, it's my story, and my whole body just was like, bing, you got to talk to this person. And I literally just looked at her. I don't even know what the book is about. I didn't even ask what the story was. I just was like, I followed a gut intuition, like I followed something, and I was like, I'll have you on the podcast. And even as I was saying it, I could kind of feel like there was a part of me going, what the freak are you doing? You don't even know this person. You don't know the story. You don't even know the book. What if it's terrible? But there was this other part of me that was like not letting me stop. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but we're going to talk a lot about that whole idea of what comes within you that just doesn't let you stop. No matter how many times you've tried, you just keep going. So I want to introduce Stephanie Wilson. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. So exciting. And Stephanie is a newly published author of this wonderful book we're going to talk about, Big Waves and Wooden Benches, which I absolutely adore the title. It's so funny. She is born in New Jersey, but raised in Florida. I mean, if that's not an oxymoron. She loves to laugh, and she's a lover of animals, and she's always dreamed about being the female president. How many of us were like that when we were kids? And yet she would always make this little disclaimer, if it didn't work out, I just want it to be a good story. And in her eyes, she's definitely got her wish. Stephanie currently resides in New York City's Upper West Side with her scruffy Puerto Rican street dog, Luna, which might bark in the background because she does want us to know she's there. Stephanie's goal is to encourage people to take a different path, to follow that heart's pull into the whirlwind of the unknown, even if it goes against societal expectations, perfectionism, or any kind of fear has conditioned them to live. Playing it small and playing it safe is just not an option. She strongly believes storytelling can save lives, and her MBA and over a decade of artistic training both help her live out that passion. Stephanie, welcome to Living the Liminal.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Christy.
Yes, so am I. So I am going to start with this passage in your book, and you're going to laugh because it's different than the one you and I talked about yesterday.
All right.
So Stephanie, I want our audience to know, Stephanie and I tried to do this recording yesterday, and then it didn't work because, internet gets entangled when there are big energies, and she and I have a lot of energy and excitement and passion about this topic we're going to talk about. So what's funny is we're coming back today, and it's like it has a whole different feel to it. And so I'm laughing because everything always works out in the way that it should. And if we just could trust that a little bit more, I think our lives would be so much happier, but we're ridiculous and we don't. So there's our learning, right? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read from your book, and it's the very end. And it's interesting that I'm going to choose from the very end, but because it's not that the other parts are not important, which we will talk about. But there are a couple things you say at the very end that kind of struck me as just the essence of life right now for women, females, those who identify as females, and how our voice and our way of living and our being, things we already know, intuition, instinctively, is really beginning to rise to the surface. And we're showing life in a new way. So here's the passage. I will admit My steadfast optimism and unwavering determination has now been slightly tamed, or rather matured for the sake of peace. A peace that came once I stopped craving and pushing towards a life I desired but didn't have. Still, I will continue onward, as tempting as it is to play it safe and declare absolutely not. That's insane. There's no way I'm doing that. The truth is, the minute I'm pulled forward again into the whirlwind of the unknown, I'll go. But for now, my journey forward is actually a journey backward. Okay, so I'm going to jump, like I'm going to leap so fast into the whole idea of you at the end of this time period. How long was this whole time period? Like a year?
6 years from start of the book to end of the book in the book, but then it took me 3 years to write the book.
Okay, so this entire story of this book is like the 6-year time span, which some people would say, oh my gosh, that's so long. And then other people would say, that's nothing. Like that's nothing in the span of our life, right?
Yeah.
So this entire 6 years is filled with all these little blips of stories and not even stories, experiences that you keep running into. But the fact that at this moment, you are like noticing there is a duality of playing it safe, right? Staying in the comfort, staying in the known. You definitely had success in that way. I mean, it wasn't that you weren't having success, you were. And then also, though, the duality of noticing this inner fire that comes about and that just yanks you into something that seems so utterly out of the ordinary and ridiculous in a way. Is that a good description of like where you were when you got to that 6-year mark?
Yes, you really nailed it. And I have to commend you because you took my favorite paragraph out of the entire book and just read it. And I love that paragraph so much because it just speaks to so many things. Where I was in that point was a sense of freedom from two different things. And it is a duality. There was a sense of freedom from detaching from the outcomes of anything that I strive to do, but also the courage to follow your heart, detaching from whether or not you're going to have safety or you're going to be put in a situation that tests you, that fortifies you. And by staying present and going, listen, I have that piece from not wanting a life I don't have, even though I take those steps forward. I also have the courage in my heart to follow that pull, despite some of the outcomes that it's led me to in the past.
Yeah, because you were really at times face to face with some like the kinds of outcomes that really inhibit us from even taking the leap, right? Lack of money, sometimes it was a physical being scared in some way. You were put in situations where physically you were harmed. I mean, you were coming up against, and again, I want to say it's kind of like this wrestling that your inner self was wrestling with. Here's what I need you to do to grow, evolve, and become this person you're supposed to be on the mission for life. And yet here's this other part of you going, no, I'm not doing that. That's scary. That doesn't even make sense. It's not rational. It's not logical. And it's like there are these two parts of you.
Yeah.
Did it feel like that in the moment of those experiences? Or is there only the looking back that gives you that?
In the moment, I first felt that I just was in my heart and following my heart. But then when things started to go awry in certain regards, because in other regards it didn't go that way, it caused my logical brain to come in and go, you know what? I'm going to wait for a sign, or I'm going to wait for a synchronicity. And they always came. And so in the moment, I just felt this steadfast faith. Looking backwards, I can tell you that every major fear that I had that deeply rooted me into stagnation in my life came to fruition, and I survived it. So looking back, I feel a level of freedom. In the moment, it all just felt like breadcrumbs pushing me forward, and I didn't foresee that it would happen to end badly or end in a struggle. And then the next signs forward felt like it would be a different outcome. So I just stayed in the moment as much as I could.
Yeah, it wasn't that I got a sense that you kept making the same mistake over and over. It wasn't, there was a thread. There was definitely a thread through every experience. And I want to delve into some of those that I noticed, because that's just how I read books, is looking for patterns, right? So I noticed some of these threads. It was just this, and I think it goes back to this pattern of the part where you say, once I stopped craving and pushing towards a life that I desired but didn't have. So it's almost like, again, it's the will of the mind. Like, my mind is telling me this is the life I am supposed to have. Society says I'm supposed to have. I am, I got to follow this pattern. I got to follow the way it's always been done in my family. I got to do what people expect of me. And then there was this other will, something what I would consider to be, it's more of like a heartfelt, soulful desire that you didn't even quite know what that meant. You didn't even know what you were working towards. You just knew you had to follow.
Yes, and I was wildly successful in the look good on paper quest
Yeah.
to have everything you need to be successful by what I perceived were societal norms. But there was a authenticity that was stifled, an inner creative, an inner artist. And once I came back from my travels, that I'm sure we'll touch on, I felt the urge to excavate that so strongly that I think I believed it would save me. And instead of just allowing it to be me and be my essence in any arena or environment I found myself in, I created this creative lifestyle heaven, if you will, that I was just steadfast pushing towards.
Mm-hmm. I think we always, when we step into the unknown, we want something to come save us, to protect. That's the mind saying you need a little protection here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we just travel down the unknown without that craving for it to define us, we don't need definition. We already are wonderful in the way that we are. We don't need to have things define us. And I'm speaking from my own truth as well as yours. Like always looking for and seeking permission and acceptance and validation. And we don't need all that. If it feels good in your heart and you feel like this is the path you're to be on, just go fucking walk the path. Like, just do it. And I love that part about your I love that about your story. And so, okay, I'm going to dig in a little bit and then we'll come back to okay. So I'm laughing because I'm trying to go back into those moments. The mountain biking and the trees. It's such a metaphor for life. So tell our audience, I want you to tell that part, because to me, it was like, I need to bottle this up and give it to people. They need this metaphor.
They do. And so much so that I almost titled my book something in reference to it.
Yeah.
But so I spent some time mountain biking, and one of the things in Florida, and I'm sure a lot of the trails all over the world, is that the trees on the trail can get very, very narrow, where it feels like you have like 2 inches between your bike handle ends to clear the trees. And I hit a few and I would crash, and it was not fun. And I was taught that it was because I would look at the tree, and that the only way the bike can clear those 2 narrow trees is if you don't look at the trees, is if you look straight through them ahead of them and just keep pedaling. And without fail, as close of a call as it would feel like, you'd make it through the trees. It's the minute your eyes even glance for a half a second at one of those trees, your bike will hit it. And so it was such a life lesson that I used to describe some of the steadfast faith I needed in the beginning of the story.
And that's why I love that story, because it's a metaphor for life. Like, how many times do you look at the wrong thing, and then the thing you're really meant to be desiring or focused on doesn't happen because it blocks you. It bops you in the head. And the silliest little story is coming to mind when the lady is doing my pedicure, she'll say, I'm going to put your shoes on, but don't watch me, because when I do, I crinkle my feet and then they messes up the toes. So I have to like look totally away so that she can just do it. And it's the same kind of metaphor. It's like, don't focus on the obstacles, focus on something way far down the road.
Yeah. And that can even be said for, there's a lot of motivational speakers out there that talk about focusing too hard on your plan B or your fallback plan. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, when I had to trust that everything was going to work out so that I could go and take the trip and go on the travels that are in the story, I had to only focus on that. I couldn't focus on everything that was falling through or going wrong. And it helped me keep my head in the game into the very last minute.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, there were times I was like getting a little anxious for you reading it. I was like, damn, that girl is unfreaking stoppable to be like getting to that moment. I mean, the journey on the boat, and I don't want to, we're not going to talk the details of the book because I want everyone to read it. So we're going to skirt around it as we talk about what's meaningful and purposeful here. But that moment when literally I'm like, damn, I think a lot of people would have gone home. Like, you're done. Go home. It's not going to happen. And you're just like, no, up until that last moment you stepped on, I was like, oh my God, there's something deep. And what I love about that is that depth, you accessed it. I think that is where women, mostly women, I'm going to say mostly women, because I think in this incident, men run from different agencies within themselves. But women, we don't ever really truly get to the depth of things within our heart and soul to where we can find the true inner peace. And you had so many moments throughout this book where your experiences, you went to the edge. I mean, sometimes I was thinking, oh, honey, you're even like hanging over the edge here, but you did. And I think that's where you access the depth of that inner peace and really wrestled with those inner struggles that you weren't denying them, you were facing them head on.
Yeah. And I mean, it's from reading the back of the book cover, it's not a secret that I leave my life behind and I board a ship that circles the world. But what we're referring to is my ability to have gone on that trip and how it boiled down to some last minute events. And what I learned in those moments, at least for me, is that if you want to go 100% of the way, when you hit 97% of the way, I feel like that's the biggest test that comes into play. In some way, shape, or form, your faith is tested. And here I am down to the wire, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And I kept going and kept taking steps that were almost as, well, I'm just going to drive to the ship and wave goodbye. But I believe that in that moment, I didn't want to reject the situation prematurely. And 97% of the way is premature in my mind. So I was like, no, I'm going to go the distance. If the universe, the world, whatever you want to call it, doesn't want to meet me there, at least I know I showed up. And that was what I wanted to give myself, because if I walked away when things got tough right towards the end, I would have always wondered. But if I would have gone the distance, even if it didn't work out, there would have been no wonder and there would have been no regret.
Yeah, because I think there's power in that 3% that if you walked away because it really did in that moment, getting that close, it looked like it wasn't going to happen. I mean, in all evidence of the evidence that we're taught to look at, it really looked like you were not going to go on this journey. You were not going to get on this boat and go on this trip for as long as, I mean, it did. And I think to see that as counterintuitive to what we are naturally programmed to believe and to trust in, you kind of stepped into a different agency of, no, I have to go 100%. It may not work out, but if I don't live into that 3%, I will always doubt myself's ability to go far in anything else.
Yes. And that 3%, my time sitting in that 3% was me having a newfound relationship with feeling foolish, something that I refused to allow in my life moving up into that point. And I had people looking at me like, she's crazy. What is she thinking? I can't believe she thinks this is going to work out. And having to learn to be okay with feeling foolish because this is what I felt the need to do was new for me in my life. It was very hard to do, but very rewarding at the same time because it worked out.
Well, I think that it speaks volumes to the idea that if we are going to really have fulfillment in all relationships and all experiences in our life, we have to really solidify the one with ourselves. And part of that is seeing what we call, in the line of work that I do here, looking into the shadow parts of ourselves, those darker parts. And that's what you did. You didn't run from it. You developed a relationship with this darker part of you that was like, oh my God, you can't be foolish. Are you kidding me? You gotta get your act together. You can't be like failing. And I think when we can hug and embrace failure and foolishness and embarrassment, you know what? The sky's the limit. That's when we break the glass ceiling.
Yeah. And
Okay.
and the feeling on the other side of it, to this day, I haven't done anything in my life that can compare to the feeling of that day to go, oh my goodness, it paid off. And it's encouraged me in smaller moments of my life where that urge to turn around came into play.
Mhm. Well, I think it was an impetus for the trajectory of your life to just kind of shift. Hello, we're talking about a boat, change course. I mean, you had to change course, right?
Yeah.
You need those big moments. Um, so you get on the boat and you have these experiences both on the boat when you're there and with a couple people, like when you're in Nora in New York City, when you were living with her. And then I think there might have been one with a character named Celeste. Is that
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it seems like we're talking about these big moments. Okay. And you have this newfound relationship with this aspect of yourself that always kept you small and hidden. And yet, you started to recognize randomly and most on many occasions where you still wanted to hide and not be truly vulnerable. You wanted to project an image, you wanted to look a good place. So speak to that a little bit, because again, that's just a profound insight that it's not a one and done for us. It's a constant journey, constant evolution of a deeper part, a deeper aspect, understanding that deeper, having better understanding, integrating it. It's not just a one and done because you stepped on the boat.
Yeah. And going around the world on this ship for 115 days was a time of, it was almost like an incubation period, like a nucleus, if you will, where I was disconnected from the world. And there was so much self-growth and times where I was able to step into myself more as a person. And then I walk off the ship and I feel that all of that started to get tested. And it were these huge tests where I started to then lose the faith in that heart pull and trusting that heart pull and trusting myself. So I started to look outside of me. One of the things that I wasn't prepared for, and Christy, I bet if I would have talked to you before I went on this trip, I would have been prepared for it, was that going on this trip was kind of like a stick shift driving, where if you're in third gear and all the people in your life are in third gear and then you shift to fourth, there's nothing wrong with third gear. It's just your car's going to go at a different speed. There's going to be distance that gets created. There was so much goodbye that was coming into my life when I came back from this trip, because I was different. They were different. Life was different.
Yeah.
That loss and the grieving of shedding the life that I had emotionally. See, I had to shed it physically before I left for the trip, but then I was shedding it emotionally. I wasn't prepared for that. And that rejection and that loss started to make my self-worth that I gained on that trip plummet. And I started to look outside of me for the answers. And that's when things really, anytime they went awry, I was looking outside of myself for the answers.
And I love that you said that, because on that boat, when you talk about being like in a nucleus, you really were. it was like almost, and I'm going to say this because this is the image that comes to me when we're talking, is you were almost safeguarded in the womb. You had so many, your dinner party, your dinner group, I
Dinner
just call
table,
it dinner
yeah.
party. I meant like your dinner people. Okay, the people you ate dinner with, those were your people. They were like surrounding you, and they were beautiful. They had character, they had depth, they challenged you, they welcomed you, they helped you gain insight, they motivated you, they inspired you. And you're right, you kind of like shed this other part of you to be incubated with them. And then once you step off the boat and you're this like, oh wow, it's like life starts just becoming like a windstorm and things are getting shoved at you. And I think that's another very valid point for our audience listeners is it's not that you did anything wrong or that you weren't meant to be in that space. It's that this is the fun part of life. Think about it as like a pinball machine. It's just the unique, colorful game we play in life that life is always going to bring you, because it's going to bring you the opposite so that you can gain more agency, become more aware, become more conscious. And if we get lost in it, which we can if we rely too much on our mind, what I love about your stories is you sometimes were aware of them before the experience. Sometimes you were right in the middle of it and then you would have the aha. And sometimes it was like well after that you realize, oh my gosh, what was I doing? I love that you just were open to whenever the learning comes, the learning came. Was that always your personality, or did it require you to go on that boat first?
I think it required me to go on that boat first.
Okay. So
Because
that big monumental experience was really, it really did change the trajectory of who you were.
yes, because what I learned was my time on that ship, while it did heal some wounds, it really was a time where I had just gotten rid of the expectations, the mathematical equation that I was trying to fit myself into.
Mhm.
So I was open, I was curious, I was moldable as far as allowing, learning to be present, learning to allow, learning to experience life in all its glory, and understanding what it feels to be alive, because as successful as I was, I never once felt alive. And so I had that growth. But then when I got off of the ship, I realized that there were deeper wounds that
Mhm.
were there. And here I'm like ready to paint a brand new life. I had this blank canvas and I had a paintbrush and my easel and my paints. And then I had rejection after rejection start to come my way. And I just didn't know how to navigate it, with a sense of authenticity, instead of putting up the walls of success to go, fine, if you're going to do this, well, I'm just going to show everybody how amazing I am with all this success that doesn't mean
Mhm.
anything to me. I didn't have that tool anymore, or that defense.
Yeah, yeah. You didn't have that ego defense in
Yes.
order to move into. It's like you felt it on the boat because it was a freer place, right?
Wow.
It was just, those people, you could say, those people paid to be on that boat. They paid for that journey of a lifetime, that freedom to explore and being creative. And so they were representing you. They were just mirrors to who you were. And then you come into this like bigger life where you're not going to get 100% of mirrors of who you are. You're going to get the exact opposite as well.
Yeah.
And how to really, that was where I think the true learning started to come in for you, was when you kept running into all these experiences with these people that would be like, you would even question. I loved how you were still curious. You were still curious, maybe not 100% in the freer curiosity, but you were still started questioning, like, why are they acting like that? And why are people doing this? And why is this happening? And why isn't this working out like this? And I think that may have been the thread that kept you going, was stay in that curious state, allow it to kind of move you forward. There's an energy in that as well. We don't get to true creativity unless we're curious enough to get there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, and I don't know if you realize this, but a lot of the major struggles, lessons, and happenings that took place after the trip really presented themselves in certain ways on the ship, but in ways
Yeah.
that were a softer, more loving way to experience it. And I even got into some trouble when I was in India, but my intuition was just so on guard and I was so present that I knew, and I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I navigated it. And it was so much easier in that encapsulated environment, as if like I was in school, right? And now they're like, okay, now go out into the real world and do these things. And it's so much harder to do. And that's where I had some struggle.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm still going to stay with this topic because there were so many moments that I'm even noticing you kept running into passive aggressive people. They seem to sort of steal your shine, suck the life out of you, grab your energy, and you just kept going toward. It's like you kept running into the same kind of person in a different format. Did you feel that way?
Yes. And I have a wisdom now that I didn't have then. But Christy, if you have a podcast on boundaries, I'd love to listen to it.
Yeah.
Because
No.
I didn't have any.
Well, I think it's. I'm gonna even push that talk a little. It's boundaries, but it's not boundaries because we are fearful of. It's a sacred boundary that is a form of being selfishness that we don't understand in this world as women. To be very self-centered means that we are really going to understand the essence of our truth, the essence of what we need physically, emotionally, spiritually, and that we are holding that sacred and only giving permission to folks outside of us who gets to be close to us and generate their own energy fuels from that resource. We get to be selfish. We get to decide. And I think that that's, you kept running into it. And I think in those moments, and tell me if I'm incorrect here in my observation, but you were running it and you were still a little bit outside of yourself trying to figure it out. Like, why are they coming toward me in this way? And what I noticed is there seemed to always be a little bit of anxiety around really just owning your true self in that way. Like the people on the boat would tell you wonderful things. Your art sake folks would tell you, you had this group that kept telling you how beautiful and courageous and strong. It's almost like you didn't believe it.
Oh, I absolutely had a self-worth issue. And I think where it went awry very quickly was with the loss that I had immediately off the ship, caused me to then trust in people I shouldn't trust and make some decisions I shouldn't make, which landed me in severe financial struggle.
Yeah.
And I think that growing up in humble beginnings, I attached the pre-ship life to success and money, and that was my worth. I had a hard time believing in myself and maintaining boundaries and maintaining my self-worth when I was needing help for people because I was in a state of struggle. I felt a little helpless, and then as a result, a little hopeless.
And yet every time you called somebody to ask for help, the answer was yes, immediately.
Yeah, there's a point in the book, I'm sure you'll talk about it because it's a big one, where I get this question a lot. People said, why at this point, like, why didn't you give up? And I did. When I hit rock bottom, I made a call to hang up my hat, and my mind said, time to go back to your old life. You have bottomed out. Go home, create the life you had before you got on the ship, and let's just forget everything. I made that decision, maybe
Mhm.
in my head, maybe not my heart. But when I called the One Lifeline, a friend, to say, come and take me in, she gave me one step forward of a connection that was the next step. And no matter how much my mind said, no, go back to your old life, my heart said, okay, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, you didn't even question her. You didn't even like fight her on that. You didn't battle her and say, no, really understand, I'm done here. Like, I'm exhausted. This is not working. She said, nope, here's where you're going. And you were like, okay.
Because there's this thing that I learned in these depths of despair is that it's like when you run a marathon. I've never run one, but this is going out on a limb of assumption here. But like when you get to mile 18, I hear mile 18 is the mile where you just want to die.
Nope,
And
that's true.
okay, so if I were running a marathon and I stopped at mile 18, now, like the immediate relief will feel like heaven. But then weeks from then, you'd ask yourself, could I have kept going? And I knew there was nothing more my body wanted than to relax, to feel safe, to just exhale and
Mhm.
not be so afraid. But I knew that, just like that analogy, that I would always wonder what would be on the other side of just taking one more step further.
And I think that's the deeper desire in you. That's the fire that wouldn't go out. Like our fires don't go out,
Yeah.
even though we don't access them, even though we tame them. I mean, I love that part in the book where you talk about, I think I'm tamed. Well, no, I don't think I'm tamed. I think I'm just mature to understand me and life a little bit more. Um, but I think our fire, our inner fire that we're born with, this inner passion to be everything we can, the potential and the possibilities, it doesn't go out. It may go down, it may get smaller, but it just kept lighting for you. It just kept going, kept igniting. It wouldn't let you stop. It was burning its way towards wherever you were meant to be heading.
Yes, it was a bit of a madness, and I think it was because the situation was so rather dire that it did feel so heightened, where it was either black or white. I was either pushing forward or I go back to my old life. There was no stability in the situation, so it definitely felt that way. Versus, what later on and in the story in the end, when I decided to write my book, I think what I meant by calming and taming myself is, I'm going to tell my story and I'm going to write this book having no idea even how or where to begin, but I'm going to do it for the process. I'm going to do it for the experience of myself, not for the
Yeah.
outcome of it. Will it be a book? Will it be a one woman show? Nobody knows. And there was a freedom from detachment of the outcome. But when you're in dire straits, it's really hard to do that.
Yeah, I think you cannot access your creativity when you're in stressful mode, when you're in stressful formats within your body. Your body cannot access creativity to even think outside or think of other options. You're just held to this one essence.
Yeah.
And that's where fear sort of imprisons you. In the book, you're introduced to an energy healer, and you talk about you weren't even really sure, but something just lured you into. So it's funny, you're going to an energy healer and you feel the energy to go towards that. What was that experience like for you?
That was right when I got back off the ship, and there was so much loss and rejection in my life, that I remember saying in the book, I just want somebody to tell me what to do. Like, I lost complete connection to that inner compass within myself. And through a series of random events, now I'm at this healer, and I'd never been to one before, really fully understood it. But here she is telling me what to do. And she's talking as if there's this other side, and going on and on. And I didn't understand it fully, but just went, okay, she's telling me what to do, and she's telling me it's going to be okay. And if I do these things, everything's going to work out. It's a lot easier to believe something despite your logic, to have something to believe in, than to sit in the unknown and figure it out yourself when
Yeah.
you lose your own compass. And that's what I did. And I fell flat on my face.
Well, I think it speaks to a lot of times women, we go down these spiritual paths for that exact reason of what you just said. We're in this uncomfortable place, we're confused, we don't know what we're doing. And if somebody comes along and they seem to have a connection that we don't have necessarily, now I personally believe we do have it. We're just, excuse me, not accessing it, right? But they have it activated. They're active in it, and it's like, oh, that just looks like it's the answer. That looks like it will help me. Kind of like it's a inner tube that allows you to just lay back on the river and not have to keep working so hard at it. And I do believe we do that a lot, and we are bypassing ourselves simply by going down routes of religion and spiritual um, um, capabilities, and And we're doing that. And then backwards, in a backwards way, we somehow finally get back to, oh, there's still more there I have to work towards.
Absolutely. And let me just say too, I am very spiritual. I have found that relationship. So I'm not knocking it. Where you hear me from my point of view in the book is of no knowledge of it and desperation.
Yeah.
And I think that whether it's religion, spirituality, or anything, it's really about the relationship with yourself. And
Yes.
it's within you. All the answers are within you. You are your own guru. I think where we, especially women or anybody who identifies as a woman, gets in trouble is when we think that those people have answers that are outside of ourselves. And
Yes.
and nobody does. I don't care who you are. Nobody has the answers for your life. Nobody can predict the future. It's not, you lean into it because it's like saying at mile 18 of the marathon, oh, you've got this bike I can ride to the finish line. Let me
Yeah.
get on the bike. When in reality, it's not the way. It's not the answer.
Yeah, I love when I'm talking to people and I'm constantly saying to them, you need to what does yourself say? You know yourself better than other people. And yet there were so many times in the story that you believed others more than you believed yourself.
Mhm.
It was like you would even question or even say or think and feel, and yet you would still believe the other person, even if it was like, why is she doing that?
Yeah, and I tell you what, when I went back and wrote it, I was like, why? I had to stay in the past tense moment because
Yeah.
I definitely grown so much now. But I even wanted to give her a little shake here and there when I wrote her and me. But um, because
Yeah, I
every
just wanted to pick you up and hug you and go, sweetheart, what are you? Come on. Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely an act of it was very vulnerable to go back and be that honest because sometimes I did feel rather foolish. But when you lose sight of your inner compass, that and you or you're disconnected from it, you do make those types of decisions because you just don't trust yourself. I lost trust. I lost my trust with my own self, my relationship, everything. I just disconnected.
Yeah. And I love the way you say that because it's so true. I mean, when when people are behaving in a way that's destructive and it's destroying everything within what they want, and it's not good, and it doesn't even feel good to the people around them, nor does it feel good. It's really just about that simple fact they disconnected from something within themselves, and to trust and to feel safe within themselves. It's not about feeling safe out here, it's about within yourself. You have lost that ability to gain the agency of your own power.
And I'm not a life coach, and my book was never intended to tell people how to live their life or what to do. Um, it was to say you're not alone and to keep going. But I will say that anybody who is in a time of struggle, strife, and you want answers, I would say that I wish I could go back in time and say and not worry about the answers, but find ways to reconnect to myself and say that's how I'm going to spend my day, that's how I'm going to spend my time, is getting back in touch with myself, reconnecting with that inner compass, however that needs to happen, instead of trying to find the answers and way forward in that state of disconnection.
Yeah, because I feel like when you were on the boat, you had some glimpses of moments when you were really starting to connect with yourself. And quite possibly you just needed another 115 days to get that fully acclimated and activated. And I say that laughingly because there were those moments that would kind of start to come through, and you could just tell they weren't fully evolved. They were just sort of like, they were maturing. They just weren't matured in the way that then you could get off the boat and have the agency to move forward in a totally different way. It's like you fell back prey to old programming.
Oh, absolutely. And I love the whole I needed another 115 days because I had to buy 2 tickets since I was by myself in a cabin. And so, maybe they owe me another 150 days, but I definitely felt like I was sent out into society too young of a child in this rebirth, if you will, where it's like, no, I
Mhm.
need more time to fortify. And I think I felt that walking off the ship. And in that last day, I think I capture that hesitation a little bit. And then the pep talk in my head was rather so, you got this, you got this. But there was more of
Yeah.
a wide-eyed state of shock pep talk. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I could feel the nervous energy you had to step
yeah.
into this life you knew nothing about anymore, because it really wasn't what it was. You knew it wasn't going to be what it was, and yet you didn't really know what it was going to be.
And I now know what people talk about with reverse culture shock when,
Mhm.
they say you move somewhere foreign, everything looks foreign and feels foreign. But when you come home, they say when it looks familiar but feels foreign, it is
Mhm.
equally challenging. And that's what I experienced. The old life I left behind, it looked familiar, but it felt foreign. And here I was standing in the middle of it going, every decision I make now is a brand new decision that will carve out my next life. It was a lot of pressure as well
Yeah.
as excitement, because I didn't want to make a wrong move. And then I'm surrounding myself with old everything and trying to carve a new path. I didn't know how to navigate it.
Well, and you were still then at that point operating from an old programming, right? So when we transform and we evolve, we start in that heart area, we start in the body, we do all that, but the mind is still programmed for old conditioned ways of thinking and believing. And that's what you started to rely on, was this success mindset that said I have to show people that that boat experience was well worth it, and I'm a different person. I got to show people I'm a different person. And you're right, that pressure is just, we carry that weight that we have to be different, and to show people that we really are not who we used to be.
Absolutely. And as much as my mind knew that I didn't want to go back to my old life and I had shed it, it was the only way I knew how to create success and receive what I
Mhm.
perceived to be love and approval. So
Yes.
emotionally, I hadn't shed it. Physically, my brain knew, but emotionally, I wasn't there. And so
Right.
it's like you can't solve a new problem with your old solution. And that's what
Right.
I started to do. And it
Yes.
did not go well.
So speaking of not going well, I want to talk a little bit about the Nora relationship.
Oh,
You lived with Nora for a while. She was in a kind of a little bit of a rut, and she gave you a space for you to develop housing. Um, okay. So while that relationship wasn't 100% positive, it seemed like, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say this to you, it seemed like you both needed each other. Would that be true?
yes, 100%.
So sometimes we can have a relationship that may not be satisfying or feel good, and it may have come with a lot of conflict and challenges, but there is a reason we're brought together.
Yes, and I one of the criticisms I got from the people who knew me who read my book was, why didn't you say anything when it all went down? And I just, was in a state of keep going, but at the same time, I really viewed how it ended as a strong sign to move on, that
Mhm.
I needed to disconnect. I didn't feel like I was a victim to a situation as much as it's a horrible thing to have happened. But for me, it was like, I almost felt like the universe is like, okay, clearly the signs she needs need to be sledgehammers hit over her head at this point,
No, I totally felt that when I was reading it. I'm like, she just isn't getting it. So it had to come in this way of physical harm. And I
Yeah.
don't want to tell too much of the story, because again, I want people to read it, but it had to come in a way that was physically, right? Physically harming for you, because you weren't getting it in any other way. The signs had always been there.
Well, and if you think back to the beginning of the book, my life, fell apart. My successful, perfect life within 1 month from every angle crumbled. And, when I gave a talk recently. I call it Sledgehammer Road. And I know that sounds silly, but it's when you go down a road of denial where you say to your inner self, I'm not listening to you. I'm not listening to you. If
Mhm.
you like drastic things happen that call you down the direction that you're asking for guidance to go down. And that's how the story started. And then the pivotal moment, because I feel like what happened with Nora was that moment where I said enough, and I stood up and I started to fight for myself again. But again, I knew in my heart something was wrong, but I was ignoring it and I was ignoring it. And boom, that sledgehammer came and hit me over the head.
Yeah.
And now in my life, I don't allow it to get to that point anymore.
Yeah, I think it definitely was one of those experiences that it was going to teach you, because you had had a similar experience in some weird kind of way before it. Again, similar experiences, not quite exactly, where you didn't trust. And again, this is like, oh, okay, I need to trust that instinct and intuition when it comes in early on, and not keep letting it go and run its course to where I need a sledgehammer moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the one that I would giggle at. Like, I'm like, oh my golly jeebers.
I do too. I giggle at it too, oddly.
So then let's talk a little bit about the relationship with Yvonne and Artsake. And I know that that didn't end quite like you wanted. And again, grief keep coming in bigger ways. I thought the sweetest moment was when she says to you, I know I've always been hard on you. How did that feel?
Oh, that's when she says that she would put her money on me.
Because again, it's not like that was the first time you've heard someone say. You had the boat people telling you that. You had these artsy group, this other group, like your artistic group saying, but it was just a sweet, tender moment when she says, I know I've always been hard on you, but I would always put my money on you. Like
Yeah,
that just to me was again another pivotal moment for you too. Why don't you trust you? I trust you.
yeah, and you know, there was two big things happening there, but one is, you know, Yvonne was the catalyst for me breaking down that shell and those walls that were my previous life, and in emerging out this authentic essence of who I was as a creative being. So she, of all people, you know, to have the cause look at you and almost offer you the cure of reinforcement, it was her words that, while all of the reinforcement I've ever gotten is wonderfully received and heartfelt, hers meant the most to me. But it also was, sometimes I felt like Yvonne wanted me to come home. She wanted me to be a member of the tribe and to live that life. So for her, it was also giving me permission in a way to kind of fly and to say, I know that you want to come home. I want you home. You have this safe tribe here. I
Yeah.
believe in your ability to fly. But it taught me about the meaning of coming home and having that home. And it's not physical, it's within yourself. And that
Mhm.
bonds you with those people who went down that journey of discovery with you and with their own lives. And that's what
Right.
she was merging, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it was just a really sweet, tender moment, and I love that. Um, so, what was your most surreal experience out of all of it?
Most surreal experience was the morning I woke up not able to board the ship when the ship was set
Okay.
to leave. And what transpired that day is the most surreal thing that instills in me repeatedly in my life that I'm not in charge, that there's something else driving the
Yeah.
bus, and to let go and to trust. I revisit that day anytime I get scared, I feel unsure, because, you know, even now as an author, there's days I wake up going, oh my God, look what I've done. And then there's days going, what's going to happen? Oh my God. And
Right.
it's human nature to waffle. And
Yeah.
that day puts wind in my sails any chance it needs to, or anytime I think about it.
Well, I mean, I really enjoyed the book. I enjoyed the story. I highly recommend anyone who just wants to read a story that awakens you, ignites something within your own self, and helps you just be at peace with your own journey. Like, you start to kind of see that your own journey is there for a reason, and it's there to take you to a new level of consciousness. Like you said, Stephanie, you know, you now trust yourself. You now listen to that inner guidance of your own being. You now have a spiritual connection to something outside of yourself. There were so many blessings and benefits that came from those 6 years of up and down and all over the place.
Yes, and I was recently at a book signing, and one of the women who approached the table said to me, would you go back and change anything? And I just looked up, and all I saw was my book being cradled in her hand. And this was after she told me what the book meant to her. And I just looked at her and I said, not a day, not
No.
a day.
And I think if we can always be in that place, you know, there's always that inner conflict between regret. Are we going to regret something? What if I regret it? But I think regret is sort of settling for the small, and not really fully owning that. Would you change anything? No. Could you have done different? Yes. But that's different than would I have lived this different? Because you look back and you are so grateful for those experiences, the people, the journey, because you would not be here today.
Well, that's so true. And it's like, a great analogy would be going to the gym. You know, you work out for 6 years, you can lift more weight than you can lift 6 years prior. And that's true with wisdom. And I look
Mhm.
back and I'm fortified. Everything that went wrong didn't hurt me, it strengthened me. It taught me
Yes.
skills, it fortified cracks in the foundation. And now, yes, with those skills, tools, knowledge, and wisdom, I can look back and go, well, I should have done this and that and this and that. But no, those things brought me to here. And I know it's a bit cliche, but it's so true.
I just think the simple ways of thinking cliches are just sometimes the most profound. We need to get back to that essence. That's the wisdom of the ancients that we need to bring back forth. We're forgetting some of those things. This has been a delightful conversation. Where can folks who are listening get your book?
Absolutely. They can go to Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, Kobo, Apple Books, Nook. It's Big Waves and Wooden Benches. Or if you want to read the first 8 chapters for free, you could go to my website, thestephaniewilson.com, and it's there for you to get a preview.
Great. And we will have all of that on the show notes so that folks can access your website and such. This has just been a delight. Thank you so much.
Christy, I've had so much fun today. This has been such a good topic of conversation.
I think it's a very enlightened, and I think it's a very much needed in our world today kind of conversation. I want to wrap up by asking you our high 5 questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So here we go. What inspires you?
Oh, anybody going out on a limb inspires me. Anything where I can laugh inspires me. And anything that makes me feel uncomfortable inspires me.
Oh, God, I love that. How do you have fun?
Oh my goodness. My dog Luna loves, every morning she brings me to the park at the crack of dawn and we play fetch.
Oh,
I
nice.
love to go hiking. Nature is how I refuel, especially
Mhm.
living in New York City. And I could be found at a comedy club or anywhere where comedy is being done. I love to laugh.
Great.
Yeah.
What is one thing you can't live without?
Um, Oh my goodness. My dog.
She's been so good, I have to say. Like, we were worried about her, but she's been so good.
I'm so proud of her. She's dead asleep, and she has 8 bones that I bought her this morning.
Oh
lying
my
next to
God,
her
that
bed.
is hilarious. How do you define freedom?
I define freedom in a couple ways, and I think actually my book is a lot about freedom.
Mhm.
I find freedom to be no longer needing to live to an expectation that is outside of yourself.
Mhm.
And I want to add to this by saying, my sister's a stay-at-home mom of 20 something years, and that's not the life she thought she had to. So it's not, my story isn't about going around the world, about living true to yourself. And that's the first step of freedom. The second to me is having your fears no longer control you. And thirdly is to feel safety and security in the middle of the unknown.
I love that. I especially love having your fears not control you. It doesn't mean we don't have the fear. It just doesn't control the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beautiful. What are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for the people, the tried and true people in my life who have been my teachers, my support system. Um, as much as I had in my life, I was doing my own, because it feels that way in a time of struggle. Writing this book taught me that it does take a village, and that village is a group of people I'll forever be grateful.
Oh, I love that. Thank you again so much for sharing your book, for writing your book, for sharing your innermost, raw, vulnerable stories with us. And this conversation has just been awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've had so much fun.
And audience, thank you for listening to Living the Liminal today. This week, remember who you are, brave your confidence, courageously choose you, be the change you wish for yourself, and embrace growth and expand your awareness. You are a beautiful soul. You are a radically bold person. I love you. Peace out, my friends.